Welcome to today's webinar, Realising Strategy, Why Your Critical Systems Are Holding Your Users Back and How to Fix It. I represent Professional Advantage and my name is Nick Fish. I'll be hosting it today. Before I introduce our guest speaker, it is appropriate for a brief mention on your webinar sponsor, Professional Advantage, and then I'll give you some information that will make sure the webinar runs smoothly. Professional Advantage is one of Australia's largest and oldest privately held technology professional services firms, operating 8 offices in 4 countries, focused on enabling high-performance workplaces and having implemented hundreds of software applications over the last 25 plus years. Today's discussion reflects a strategic decision to provide a solution-focused approach to help companies achieve your operational and business outcomes while using software applications. A couple of things before we get started. The presentation element runs from 12:30 until 1. Then we have allowed a question element for 15 minutes concluding at 1:15 p.m. For your convenience, all attendees will receive a link to the presentation. This session is being recorded and all attendees will be sent a link to Professional Advantage's YouTube channel. You will see the audience has an opportunity to register audience questions on the right-hand side of your screen, and we encourage you to do so. We will get to as many of those as we can. For those, if there are any that we don't get to, we will follow that up directly and ensure that you get an answer. I can confirm that today we also have a big announcement that can represent a big opportunity for the members of our audience. So just introducing our guest speaker. As a matter of introduction, earlier this year I just noted that Gartner forecast software applications the fastest growing segment in IT spending, with a forecast revenue for Australia of $10.3 billion for 2016. A direct theme to today's webinar is how to maximise the value and realising strategy from this IT spend. And on this note, I'm very excited to welcome our guest speaker, James MUNSON. James is an early mover in the area, more commonly known as performance support, and is considered a world-leading authority on helping firms of all sizes get the most out of their IT investments in transformation programs and enterprise technology investments. Just some fast facts on James. James got his start at IBM. Later joined SAP America as employee number 50, which is more a reflection of how quickly the industry is moving rather than James's age. He has done over 100 engagements of solutions being shared for your consideration today for companies that are likely to be in your peer group, from small independent firms to global leaders, profit and non-profit organisations like Walmart, Hershey, BMW, Lockheed Martin, the Lions Foundation for Sight and Hearing, various public entities, including hospitals, Campbell's, Westinghouse, Coca-Cola, etc. I could go on. He's passionate and committed to this lever on company performance and has spent the past few years as a founder and CEO of Enable Your Enterprise. James, we have a great senior management and executive audience today from both profit and not-for-profit organisations. We have friends across the ditch in New Zealand, the US, in Asia, and from across Australia. I'm really looking forward to you giving us a taste of this very important area over the next 25 minutes. Over to you, James.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. And it's my privilege to be here. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share with you, and the invite here from Professional Advantage has an excellent reputation locally there in Australia and Asia market. As Nick spoke to and kind of foreshadowed, the topic today is talking about how best to maximize the value of your investments in technology and making sure that you're able to realize your business strategy. And that's not just business strategy from a for-profit perspective. As Nick mentioned, I've been involved with a lot of mission-driven organizations as well in the not-for-profit sector. Regardless of the size of your organization or whether it's profit or for-profit, there are some common issues that are encountered when trying to successfully deploy technology to realize your business strategy. We're going to explore what that is and how to avoid those problems if you haven't encountered them yet, and if you have encountered them, how best to overcome them. And as Nick mentioned, I'm going to be trying to go through the slides I have fairly quickly today so we can have some time at the end just to hear from your specific situation wherever you are and answer your specific questions. It is really a journey from strategy to realizing the value of your IT investments. And it's no surprise to anyone that strategy is really set within the top of the organization. I've been involved in a lot of different projects, and it really doesn't matter how big the project is. The largest one I was involved in was the $750 million project expenditure to deploy an enterprise system, and I've been involved with projects where the IT spend for the project's only been $50,000 or $60,000. And in all those cases, really, without exception, there is a need to customize those package-based systems to meet the needs of the business in order to pursue the operational goals. And in all those cases as well, there was a need to make sure that the individuals that are using those systems were able to consistently and successfully engage with those different business applications to achieve their daily tasks, their daily job, as well as meet the overall goals of the organization. A lot of you have probably been on this journey already. After the strategy has been crafted at the top of the organization, and after you've defined the need or identified the need for technology in order to achieve those goals, there's usually a process that you go through to select the appropriate of the application. And usually there's a process involved with that, and partners that may be involved in helping you with that selection process and making sure that it's meeting the business requirements that you have. But that's really kind of the first step of the journey. After you've selected the system, you must align the organization and focus on deploying the common business processes and engaging the business at all levels. And this is probably not a surprise to anyone on the call today. This is commonly referred to as organizational change management and was a cornerstone of some of the methodologies that were developed in the 90s that I played a role in as well from an SAP and enterprise perspective with Oracle and other major applications. Obviously, you need to align the leadership around the common goals, communicate those, engage mid-level management, which, by the way, in this methodology is the most commonly overlooked piece, is engaging the mid-level management group. And then in managing that process, the stakeholder management, and training the people that have to do their job day in and day out to use the systems correctly. So this is now commonplace. It was not in the 90s. It became more of a known issue, focusing on the people and the process, not just the technology, in the 2000s. But what is not commonly known is this, and this is probably the most important thing that I'll share with you today. This is a study that I was involved with, and I'll show you some others from the industry as well. This is actually conducted over 2 subsequent years just to see if there was some commonality in the results, and we found that there was. Sand Hill was the organization that drove this survey. But what's interesting about this is that it's focused on the success of enterprise-class software being deployed within a variety of organizations. Now, you would think that if it's focusing on software like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Infor, and others, were all, by the way, represented in this survey, that software functionality would be the most important thing in terms of meeting the needs of the organization for that technology. But in fact, it's not. It's not even close. So in making sure that you're actually realizing your return on investment on your IT spend that Nick mentioned earlier in the application area, it's not just selecting the best software to meet your business requirements. It's not even making sure that you align your business processes correctly to the software and engage with the organization from the previous slide that I showed you. Really, the key is to focus on effective user adoption. And that's making sure that the user community knows what they're doing with the business process changes and are effectively engaged with those changes, as well as effectively engaged with the systems that help them accomplish their day-to-day job. And that is by far the most important thing for you to focus on if you really want to get that return on investment on your technology spend. And I've been involved with probably about 100 deployments overall over the last 24 years or so across all those applications, and that's pretty consistent. But you're probably not familiar with me, but you may be familiar with Gartner Group. And this is a quote from Daniel O'Connor, who's the director of research at Gartner. And he goes on to say that end-user adoption of new technology is frequently the key roadblock to an implementation success. And actually, he goes a little further and says that it's the most critical factor for generating return on investment. And my personal observations are consistent with Daniel's observations here on Gartner Research. Another observation which I think is also key as a takeaway, and once again this has applied regardless of the size of the organization or the size of the project that I've been engaged with, is there tends to be a myopic focus on the go-live date of the technology. And there's good reasons for that. A lot of people are judged on the success or failure of hitting that go-live date and hitting the budget for that IT project at a certain point in time, from the CIO on the execution side to the CFO from the budget perspective. The problem with that is that that tends to be an event. You might have some training just before go-live so people know how to use the system appropriately. You might even have hypercare or some attention given from the super user or the key user community to the users that are going to be using this new system. And that usually lasts for a couple weeks right after you flip the switch to go live. Unfortunately, that focus degrades over time, and what you see is that the proficiency, the increase in competency that you're expecting and basing your ROI calculations on drops off rather quickly after that period of time that you provided the hypercare, unless you are purposeful about focusing on that effective user adoption. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It could be that you're growing as a company and you're onboarding a lot of new people. It could be that you're growing through merger and acquisition. Perhaps people are changing job roles within the company, or you're actually changing the definition of those job roles, which changes how people need to engage with the systems. Regardless of the reason, and those are all good reasons, you will see a drop-off in competency unless you focus on that effective user adoption. And here's the impacts that that has on the different players within the executive team as well as different areas within the organization. Ultimately, that does impede the effectiveness of realizing the overall strategy or mission of the organization. And for obvious reasons, it has a negative impact on you realizing the ROI. What may not be so obvious is I've seen this happen a lot, and I've seen it happen with some of the best organizations in the world. That focus on declaring victory early just because you hit go live and not realizing the ultimate value. From a practical perspective or a pragmatic perspective, there tends to be a drain on the help desk as you have people repeatedly calling the help desk when they really should be answering their own questions, and going to the folks that are the star performers and helping them understand how to use the system, which reduces the proficiency of those individuals. So, I encourage you really to focus on that adoption of the processes. So what does that tell us? That tells us that if we want to get the most out of our systems, we really have to focus on getting the most out of the user community and providing them with information at their point of need. Think of it as a GPS system for your applications to provide the user community with guidance in their applications to drive the effective use of those systems. And that really is what is known as the embedded performance support area or industry. Basically providing information to the user at point of need. It's like on-demand availability. And it needs to, if you're focusing on providing embedded performance support as an approach, you need to make sure that whatever you select as a solution is based on your actual system configuration, not generic packages, but how the system has been configured to meet your business needs. I'll give you a quick example of this. I was involved in a project where they had deployed an ERP system, and I was asked to come in 2 years after that because they didn't think that they were getting the ROI they needed. And it was done by IBM, which is a very large, respected company, so they were following best practice when they did the implementation. Unfortunately, they didn't follow best practice in terms of sustainment or embedded performance support. So I asked the Chief Procurement Officer and the CIO to bring together the heads of the distribution centers and the plant operations into one room for the United States. And to make a long story short, in 1 hour, we were able to find a $10 million mistake. And that mistake was quite simple, and that was how they dealt with rush orders. 2 plants of the 23 plants had understood a change that was made in the business process after go live, and it was communicated to those plants, and those plants were using the systems the way they should have been used. The other 21 plants within the organization were not aware of that and or were not using the system. So they were missing out on $500,000 per plant annually on savings, which was the amount that was realized by the 2 plants that were following this. If you do the math, it's actually a little bit more than $10 million annually. But it shows you the importance of focusing on actually using the systems the way they were designed to be configured. It's also important that you select within this approach technologies that will enable you to be flexible across applications. In today's environment, what we're seeing is that there's a variety of different cloud-based applications that are being deployed that integrate with or complement a core ERP system that are both Windows and web-based. So you want to make sure that the solution that you select is able to support a multitude of applications, both on-premise and off-premise in the cloud. So achieving your strategic outcomes obviously involves your critical systems, and achieving the outcomes required of your critical systems requires that your people use those systems as intended all the time without exception. At a glance, here's an example of some of the projects that I've been involved in. And I won't go into detail on all these. I want to leave some time for questions and answers here at the end. But what I want you to take away from this is that really this is applicable regardless of the size of the company. 250 employees, we were able to map into a savings of $250,000, or actually a little bit more than that, within the first 12 months, which is the last bullet there on the slide. And by the way, that savings was calculated based on the savings in producing content like context-sensitive help and documentation and training and support information, as well as reducing the amount of traditional training time and increasing the productivity within the organization. There are also ways, from a practical perspective, There was a Microsoft AX deployment I was involved in, where they have a very decentralized organization. And as a result, they had a very aggressive timeline and needed to find a way to not follow their traditional approach of instructor-led training. So we were able to come up with a model using this embedded performance support approach that provided the information to the users within the application and allowed us to reduce the amount of training by 50%. And what's interesting about that is, yes, it reduced the cost and the amount of training, but it actually increased the effectiveness of what was delivered to them, because we're able to provide them with information before, during, and after a training event, as opposed to just having one training event. You can see some of the other items there on the slide in terms of where you can find savings, but generally speaking, this represents the high watermark of the savings that you could recognize within different areas following an approach of using embedded performance support. Reducing time to competence. If you're following best practice, I have seen, and this is my personal experience, savings of up to 90% in the reduction of time and cost in creating system-based documentation, training, and support content, leveraging technologies that will automatically create this by going through an application. Reductions of up to 50% in training time compared to traditional models. Reduction in help desk calls of up to 40%. Reduction in errors and omissions by up to 50%, and that's specifically talking about how the systems are used in order to execute the transactions. And then reduce time and competence. That's the amount of time it takes for somebody to be proficient in their job. This is best practice. Like I said, it's a high watermark. I would expect that your savings would be significant. May not be this significant, but this is what I've seen if you do follow the best practice. Here's an example of a specific project I was involved in with an insurance company. In this case, it was a mid-sized company of about 600 employees. They actually started with Microsoft CRM Dynamics with just 75 users. The point here is that you can use this approach not just for one project, but for multiple IT projects on your IT roadmap. If you know what you're going to be doing over the next 18 months to 3 years, I encourage you to use a common approach for all those projects, which will reduce the cost considerably as you go through the project lifecycle. So embedded performance support can become a standard for systems adoption. There are technology platforms out there which can automate a lot of the manual tasks involved in creating and delivering effective training and support content, as well as help you as you're going through mapping your business requirements. And it helps overcome really that number one challenge of realizing the value of the critical systems, which is effective user adoption. What I'd like to do now is turn it back over to you, Nick. I want to make sure we have time left for questions and answers here at the end. So turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, James. Look, some of the statements you've made there, James, they're provoking some thought for me. Unbelievable, significant savings. They're big statements. Sounds like a big opportunity. Some of this will be new to the people that are on the call. So, as you can see on your screen there, talking with James, and we really feel responsible at Professional Advantage, given the amount of critical applications we install for clients as well. We really feel that effective user adoption of those technology is a step that we need to help our clients take. So not so much of an advertisement, but more of a commitment and a responsibility. So we're hosting James to come to Australia on the week of the 14th of November to work with us and our clients. Spots are limited, and in fact, I understand a couple of the days are already booked out. However, if you've seen something today that sparked your interest, for example, if you've got a new upgrade or you've got a new system that you're planning or you're currently installing or just installed, then please email us now at the email that you can see there, meet.james@pa.com. If it's the start of your journey for you, we will ensure that this isn't going away. Professional Advantage will continue to send you thought leadership in this area, and when and if it's ever appropriate for you, we would love to provide some more information. Alternatively, you can, if the timing doesn't work for when James is coming out, or James happens to be booked up at the time that you request it, then you can get in touch with myself. I think that's on the next slide there, James, and I'm happy to have more than happy to have a 15 to 20 minute call, and that's all it would take to really just identify where you're at, so we can make sure that you're getting the appropriate information and agree next steps. So once again, doing that for your convenience, as opposed to wanting to have a chat to you to see if this is something you're interested in. I really encourage you just to encourage the discussion to say, well, this is what we've got coming up, and when should we have the conversation in the future. So they're the two mechanisms by which you can act now. Alternatively, we'll be getting in contact with everybody who's registered, just to make sure they've got James's email address. If you didn't get it, you will have a recording of this session, so you should have it that way in any case, and see where you'd like to go at the moment, if at all. Let's open it up for some questions, James. And I've noticed as you've been talking that people have indulged to put a few forward, and we've got some very good ones. I have got one that I've dug out is, we're a company with 1,300 people. We have very good quality material. We use a product that says here called Captivate. I'm not sure whether you're across that, James, but Captivate, and we use that for self-help videos. Our problem is we cannot get them, the staff, to go to the self-help videos. Could you just comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. That's pretty common. It's a traditional approach. Captivate, Lectora is another tool set that's used there. Sometimes people will use Microsoft Word to document the work instructions or task level instructions of the systems, and use Snagit or some sort of screen capture tool as well, in conjunction with those simulations that are created. I have found that there are technologies and technology platforms out there that actually automate the creation of these outputs, the simulation outputs for demo simulations, interactive simulations, self-test simulations, and they allow you to change just one step of that transaction, which is important, as opposed to having to redo the whole thing. If you were to use the tools you mentioned, if you have one change in a transaction, you have to redo the whole simulation, which is an expensive endeavor. There are platforms out there that allow you to keep everything in sync and just make the small changes, which allows the people that are going through the user acceptance test process to give their feedback to the people that are creating that content, and have assurance that at the end of the day, when they do go live, the support content and the training content that's being created will appropriately represent that customized configuration of the application that's being deployed.
That's terrific, James. Thank you for that feedback. We're just going to, we're a couple of minutes ahead of schedule for the presentation, so I think if everybody's happy, we just want to make sure we maintain expectations. We'll continue with some question and answer. So I've got another one here. I can see how large companies, you mentioned, James, that you've dealt with $50,000 projects to $750 million projects, and all in between. The question here appears to relate to, I can see how large companies with large systems are affected, but how is this relevant to us as a small company with less than 250 employees?
That is an excellent question. What I found is, to a large extent, the savings that we discussed on this webinar are proportional. So those percentage savings that I talked about in terms of the amount of time that can be saved versus traditional training, instructor-led training as a delivery mechanism, or the amount of time in creating the content, that would hold up regardless of the size of the company. In fact, actually what I found is that the smaller companies tend to be leaner, just in general, for whatever reason. and even more resource constrained. So it's more important for them potentially to rely on technology like embedded performance support solutions that allow you to automatically create this content, and then with the limited resources that they have, focus on mapping those to the specific requirements of the business. I would also say that, you know, just because a business is smaller or a not-for-profit organization is smaller, that they don't have unique requirements. In fact, I found in some cases actually that they've been even more unique in how they've used applications. I was involved in an implementation with a prison system, believe it or not, that used Microsoft CRM, which is a customer relationship management software solution, for the prisoners, which is not a traditional fit for a Microsoft CRM deployment, as you might suspect. And that was a smaller, not-for-profit organization, public entity. So, you know, I would say that it's definitely applicable, both this approach as well as the value that can be gained in using the technology to automate a lot of those steps.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. One just in here is we are just starting the selection process. What phase would you recommend we would bring this in?
Sure. Well, when going through IT, you know, the selection of the IT package or software, if you're just going through that now, obviously you've gathered the requirements from the business, you know, have an idea of what you're looking at or trying to execute. I would say, you know, shortly after you've made the final decision on the software package that you're selecting is when you should make this decision. I would encourage you not to wait until later in the phases of the project when you get to, you know, when people traditionally think about user adoption, which is before go live, when you're focusing on training and setting up training events and whatnot. You really need to get into it very early. So I would say very shortly after you've selected the software application, just as you're starting to look at mapping your business requirements to set up the configuration, the custom configuration for that software, that's when you want to engage in this, because you can use platforms for embedded performance support that will help you communicate to the user community what's coming. That helps with the change management process. It also ensures that the system that you're configuring is going to be 100% in sync with the support content and the training content that's being developed, because it's a natural output of these tools that are used to create this content. So I would say very shortly after the selection process is finished and you know what software you're going to be using, that's when you want to use a tool that's capturing those work instructions of the systems for these different outputs.
Thank you, James. Another one, we do a lot of training. How does this work with or eliminate training?
That's a good one. Actually, I'll go into a bonus pack for you on that one, Nick. Here, I'll show you as well as tell you. What you're seeing on the screen, I hope folks can see this. It wasn't part of the standard deck, but it's a good question. I wanted to speak to it here visually. Traditionally, these elements that are created, I mentioned that you can use some of these outputs during organizational change. That's when you inform the user community or prepare the user community with some of these outputs to change from the as-is to the to-be processes. You can use it in traditional training. If you think about stand-up instructor-led training, one of the risks involved in traditional stand-up training is that if you're using a live training system, this training system goes down and class is over, or at least complicated. If you use a demo simulation output of or recording as what is used in the instructor-led class, that eliminates that risk because you don't have to worry about the live system going down. The other thing it does is it ensures the quality of the demos that are being presented in the class, because the instructor's experience can and will vary from instructor to instructor. But the demo content that's covered will be consistent if you're relying on a recording of the live system as opposed to a script that somebody's following through a live system. It also allows you to push out that content before training and after a training event to let them become familiar with the content and then use it after the fact. This helps with retention of the training. There's been a lot of studies that show that even the best instructors, their students, the best they can hope for is them retaining about 30% of the information that's covered. Retention is still never going to be 100%, but you can get up to 60, 70% retention if you follow that process that I'm suggesting in providing the content before and after a training. And teach them in the classes how to get their own support, how to get context-sensitive help, and how to, within the applications, get the information they need. If you do that, then what you'll see is a decline in the calls to your service center or your help desk. You'll also see a decline in the amount of effort or distraction that you would normally see from your key users or their super users supporting users that are not familiar with the system, because those individuals will be directed back to these help content within the application itself to help them. Did that answer the question, Nick?
For me it did. I think that was a really good slide, and I think it gave us a really good taste. Like the entire webinar, it's really giving so much you can achieve in a 30-minute presentation, and I think you are doing an excellent job. I don't say that lightly, and I think that gives us a really good taste of how this could support both training but also then pre or during or post reduce the amount of training effort that's required. And I do find a number of organisations may have one or two trainers in their learning development, if that at all, or they bring external trainers in, but they can only reach so many people in the audience. So I think that's excellent. Thank you, James. So just one last question has popped up, and it's really about is embedded performance support a project method or a product?
It's actually a little bit of both. So embedded performance support is it's a recognized approach. You know, if you look at Gartner, they'll recognize that as a discipline. And there's also things known as EPSS, or embedded performance support or electronic performance support systems. So there are products out there that are used to both create performance support, embedded performance support content, embed it within the applications, and create multiple outputs, or training outputs, support outputs, documentation-based outputs. But it really should be done in the context of the projects that you're deploying, the application projects that you're deploying, and thought about from the very beginning, as I mentioned earlier, right after the software selection process on through to go live and beyond, really, and having an idea of how you're going to sustain that investment over time.
Great, James. Thanks very much for that. That wraps up our time today. We do have a few more minutes, but I'm conscious of everybody's time. I do thank you on behalf of Professional Advantage for taking the time for your questions as well. Special thanks to James for your provoking thoughts and sharing stories and providing a taste on embedded performance support. We really, as I mentioned before, we really want to ensure at Professional Advantage that you get value from this discussion and also have the opportunity to act on the discussion if it's suitable. So all attendees, I'll remind you, will receive a link to the presentation. This session has been recorded, and all attendees will be sent a link to Professional Advantage's YouTube channel. There are invitations, and you'll see in the information that's sent to you, to meet with James in the first place, and or I welcome an opportunity if that timing doesn't work with James. and you will also receive a courtesy call to make sure you receive that information and get the opportunity to discuss more, or park it to an appropriate time that you think you've got a project coming up, and we'll note that and give you a call around that time as well. So thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of our broadcast.
Thank you.